Hello there, welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Galaxy, where humans face the unknown, outsmart the impossible, and turn every test into victory. So sit back and let the story begin.
The vote was already done before Nora Hale walked into the room. She knew at the moment she saw the light above the main chamber door. Green. Session closed. Decision made. She had been sitting in the side corridor for 2 hours waiting to speak, and in those 2 hours, 47 species had voted on what to do with her people without hearing a single word from them. Suki was beside her, tablet pressed her chest, fingers tight around the edges. She did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say. The door opened, and a council aide gestured them in. The Grand Council chamber of Verith Station was enormous. It was built to impress, and it succeeded. The ceiling curved up 300 meters above the floor, lined with light panels that shifted color depending on the mood of the session. Right now, they were a calm, steady blue. Peaceful. Decided the 47 delegate pods curve in a wide arc around the central floor. Most of the delegates were still in their seats. Watching, Nora walked to the center floor and stopped. Speaker Orvin sat at the head of the arc. He was old, even for his species. His exoskeleton had gone pale at the edges, and his compound eyes caught the light in dozens of small reflections. He looked at Nora the way someone looks at a problem they have already solved. Ambassador Drail of the Velhari sat 3 pods to the left. He was tall, lean, with faint silver markings along his neck that shifted when he breathed. He held a data glass loosely in one hand and did not bother to put it down when Nora entered. Orvin spoke first. Delegate Hale, you have been informed of Resolution 7 Gamma by written notice. We have asked you here as a courtesy to hear the Council's formal statement before the resolution is logged into permanent record. Nora said nothing yet. She let him continue. 3 separate incidents in the past cycle have demonstrated a pattern of behavior among human personnel that this council cannot ignore. In each case, humans operating in an official capacity bypassed authorized directives and took unilateral action in restricted or sensitive situations. This council does not dispute that the intentions were good. We dispute the method. We dispute the disregard for established order. Drell set down his data glass. Resolution 7 Gamma places human delegates and affiliated personnel under a protective framework. Movement will be logged. Actions will require prior council approval. This is not a punishment, Delegate Hale. It is a structure. Humans are a young species. Passionate. Reactive. This council has a responsibility to protect you from the consequences of your own instincts. The chamber was quiet. Suki's knuckle had gone white around the tablet. Nora looked at Drail, then at Orvin, then slowly around the arc of pods, taking her time, meeting the eyes of the delegates who would hold her gaze and the ones who would not. Then she spoke. Speaker Orvin, she said, before this resolution enters permanent record, I have one question. Orvin tilted his head slightly. The floor is not open for debate. The session is closed. It is one question, Nora said, not a debate. One question which I would like answered in this chamber, on record before the log is finalized. A pause. Orvin looked to the council's procedural officer, a small avian species perched at a side station. The officer gave a minimal nod. One question was technically within the rights of any named party in a resolution. Orvin gestured for her to continue. Nora clasped her hands behind her back. In each of the 3 incidents cited in this resolution, she said, what was the council's authorized response, and how long would it have taken to arrive? The chamber was not quiet in the same way after that. It was quiet in the way a room gets when everyone is suddenly thinking very fast and trying not to show it that Drail's silver markings shifted. Orvin said, that information is detailed in the full incident reports, which you have access to. I have read them, Nora said. I am asking that the answer be stated here, on record, before the log closes. Orvin looked at her for a long moment. His compound eyes were unreadable. Then he said, the procedural officer will note the question for the record. The council will take it under consideration. Thank you. Nora said. She did not move. She did not leave. She stood at the center of that enormous room under the calm blue lights, and she waited, and every delegate in that arc of 47 had the same thought at the same moment. This was not finished. Drayle picked up his data glass again, but he did not look at it. Suki exhaled slowly through her nose. Outside the chamber window, the dying gas giant turned in slow, ancient silence, unbothered by everything happening in its orbit. It had been there for 4 billion years. It had seen larger things than this come and go. But something in that chamber had shifted in the space of 30 seconds, and everyone present could feel it, even if no one was willing to say so out loud. Nora Hale had not argued. She had not protested. She had asked one question, and in asking it, she had made every member of the Grand Council of 47 species sit with an answer they did not want to speak aloud. The log was not finalized that evening. The recess lasted 3 days, and no official reason was given. The procedural officer listed it as a scheduling adjustment. Everyone knew it was not. 3 days was enough time for Nora's question to travel through the informal networks of Veristation. Enough time for 47 delegates to consult quietly with their advisors. Enough time for Ambassador Drayle to make 7 private calls that were all logged, but none of them answered on record on the morning of the 4th day. The chamber reopened. Nora was given the floor. She stood at the center of the great curved room with a single data card and Suki at the edge of the floor feeding. Her archive access from the communications bay. No performance. No raised voice. She began with the first incident that a human cargo crew, route number 74 Delta, diverted from their registered path 11 months ago to respond to a distress signal in the Seth debris field. The signal came from wreckage of an unregistered transport. The people inside it were Reth, a species with no formal council membership. Under current law, no council rescue obligation existed for unrecognized species. The nearest authorized council rescue team was 14 hours away. The human crew reached the wreckage in 2. They pulled out 31 survivors. Then they filed a full report and continued their route. The council's response was a formal citation for unauthorized deviation from a registered flight path. Nora read the citation aloud. She read the fine amount. She did not comment. She moved to the second incident, a human field medic named in the resolution as a primary example of reckless behavior. She entered a quarantine zone on the colony station Drev 9 without clearance 17 months ago. The quarantine had been triggered by an automated system that detected an anomalous biological reading. Standard protocol locked the zone for 48 hours pending manual review. The manual review queue at that station was 60 hours long. Inside the locked zone was a residential block. Inside the residential block, a life support relay had developed a fault. It was not a biological emergency. It was a mechanical one. The automated system could not tell the difference. The medic went in. She fixed the relay. She verified there was no actual biological hazard. She brought out 19 children and 4 adults before the life support failed entirely. She was fined. Her medical certification was suspended for 30 days pending review. Nora read the suspension notice. She read the certification number. She did not comment. She moved to the third incident that a human diplomatic aide, operating on the border moon Selchet, made contact with an armed separatist group 14 months ago. The group had taken control of a transit hub. The council's authorized response team was in position but under orders to hold because the political classification of the situation was still being determined at the council level. The determination process was projected to take 72 hours. The transit hub had 640 people inside it. The human aide walked in alone. No weapons. No backup. She talked for 9 hours. She came out with a ceasefire agreement and all 640 people walking behind her. The council's response was to classify her methods as unauthorized psychological interference in a politically sensitive situation and bar her from future diplomatic assignments without a senior council observer present. Nora put down the data card. She looked at the chamber. 3 incidents, she said. In the first, 31 people alive because a crew did not wait. In the second, 23 people alive because a medic did not wait. In the third, 640 people alive because an aide did not wait. She paused. The council's authorized responses, in order, were 14 hours away, 60 hours away, and 72 hours away. Each human involved filed a full report immediately after. None concealed what they had done. None asked for recognition. They asked for nothing except the chance to continue their work. A Velhuri aide in the back of the chamber shifted in his seat. Drail said, "The point is not outcomes, Delegate Hale. The point is process. If every individual in this galaxy acts on personal judgment instead of established protocol, there is no order. There is only chaos dressed up as conscience." "I understand that argument," Norris said. "I want to make sure the record also contains this one." She held up the data card one more time. 694 people. That is the total number of individuals alive right now, because 3 humans did not follow the process in time. That number is on record. The response times are on record. The citations and suspensions are on record. She set the card down flat on the floor table. If the Council wishes to use those incidents as the foundation for placing humanity under supervised custody, this Council is welcome to do that. But every species in this chamber will know what those incidents actually contained. And they will know that the official response to those incidents was a fine, a suspension, and a bar from future work. The blue lights above the chamber had shifted slightly. Warmer now. The color system was not designed to reflect atmosphere, but something in its calibration that day was off. Drail did not respond immediately. Orvin called for a brief recess. Suki, at the edge of the floor, did not bother hiding her expression this time. They put her in a comfortable room. That was the thing about the human observation wing. It was not a cell. The walls were a neutral shade. The bed was real fabric, not the foam gel standard of station dormitories. There was a window that showed a live feed of the gas giant outside, and a small table, and a terminal that gave her access to approved council archives. Approved. That was the word she kept noticing. Suki was housed 3 corridors over. They were allowed to communicate through the terminal, but not to meet in person after station curfew. Nora used the terminal for an hour, read through the approved archives without finding anything she did not already know, and then she went to look at the maintenance hatch behind the ventilation panel on the east wall. She had studied the station schematics before she ever boarded. Old habit from her field medic days. She always mapped exits. The hatch was exactly where the schematics said it would be. She was not trying to escape. She had nowhere to go. Vera Station was a closed ring around a gas giant with no nearby transit hub. Running was not a strategy. What she wanted was to understand the place she was being held in. The lower corridors of Vera Station were not on the approved maps. They should have been. They were structurally part of the station. But the Council's official documentation of the station skipped 4 entire sublevels between the maintenance grid and the lower cargo bay, which made no architectural sense unless you knew that people lived there. She found them 40 minutes into her walk. The first thing she noticed was the smell of cooking. Something warm, something with a spice she did not recognize. The corridor widened into an informal common space, and in it were small dwellings made from cargo containers, sheet panels, and salvage station material. Lights strung between supports. Children of 3 different species sitting together at a low table. An older creature with gray fur and very large eyes watching her from a doorway. He was Reth. She recognized the species from the first incident file. The 31 survivors from the debris field. He looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped aside from the doorway and gestured inward. Not a grand invitation, just a practical one. "You are here. Come in." Then, his name, as best she could render it, was something close to own. He had been on Vera Station for 22 years. He had come with a Reth petition for council membership. The petition was reviewed and placed in a secondary queue. The secondary queue had not moved in 19 years. He had stayed because going home felt like giving up, and because his people's petition was technically still active. He was not the only one that over the next 2 hours, Nora walked through the underbelly and met people she had not known existed. Not visitors, not criminals, just people the council had placed in queues and then stopped looking at. Species without recognized status. Communities that had formed in the gaps between official records. One of them showed her a wall where they kept count of how long each group had been waiting. The longest mark was 31 years. She stood in front of that wall for a long time. When she came back, Owen gave her a small cup of something hot and bitter and sat across from her. He did not ask her for anything. He just talked. He told her the real history of Verith Station, not the official version in the approved archives. The actual one that she listened. She was still sitting there when Warden Grell appeared at the corridor entrance. He was huge, even for his species, broad through the shoulders, with a heavy reptilian brow and eyes that were surprisingly still. He looked at her, then at Owen, then at the cup in her hand. He did not reach for his authority badge. He just stood in the entrance and waited. She stood and walked to him. "You could report this," she said. "I could." He said he did not say he would not. He just said he could, which was a different thing. "The vote tomorrow finalizes the custody terms," he said. "If you challenge it through official channels, you will lose. Drail has the numbers. He has had them from the start." "I know," she said. "Then I am not sure what you are doing here." Nora looked back at the wall with the count marks. "Understanding," she said. "What would you do, Warden, if it were your people being discussed in that chamber?" He did not answer, but he stayed. He stood at the entrance of that underbelly corridor for a long time, looking at things he had the authority to shut down and never had, and he did not speak, and he did not leave. When Nora finally walked back toward the maintenance hatch, he was still there. She did not thank him. She did not make it complicated. She just nodded once, the way you nod at someone who is standing in a line they have not decided to cross yet. He nodded back. The gas giant outside turned slowly. The corridors above stayed quiet. And in the underbelly, Owen's people cooked and counted days and waited with the particular patience of those who have learned that the world is slow and does not often look their way. She brought a list, not a speech, not an appeal, a list printed on a single sheet in plain text, and she held in one hand when she walked to the center of the chamber floor the next morning. The light panels above were white. Neutral. The 47 pods were full. Drail was in his seat. Orvin was in his. The procedural officer had confirmed before the session opened that the floor was Nora's for 15 minutes. 15 minutes to respond formally to Resolution 7 Gamma before the final vote. She looked at the sheet. Then she began to read. The Velhari were classified by the Orion Combine as an unstable species unfit for independent governance 230 years ago. The Combine cited 3 incidents of civil unrest and what they called reactive decision-making in crisis situations. The Velhari were placed under supervised governance. Their trade, movement, and diplomatic contacts were subject to Orion approval for 60 years. The chamber was not comfortable. She continued. The Murith Collective was placed under a protection framework by the Heaven Council 90 years ago. Cited reasons included unpredictable military behavior and a pattern of acting outside authorized zones to assist non-aligned worlds. The protection framework lasted 40 years. She turned the sheet over. The Drev species was classified as too reactive for full membership by the predecessor body to this council 110 years ago. They were granted observer status only, with movement restrictions for 30 years. The cited reason was a series of incidents in which Drev individuals bypassed official channels to intervene in conflicts they were not authorized to enter. She put the sheet down. The chamber was very still. "I'm not reading this to shame anyone," she said. "Every species in this room has its own history, and I am not standing here to relitigate it. I am reading it because these are the exact words used. Unstable, reactive, unpredictable, pattern of bypassing authorized channels, unfit for independent governance." She looked at Drail directly. Ambassador Drail's own species was placed under a structure nearly identical to Resolution 7 Gamma by a power that believed it knew better for 60 years. The Velhari eventually received full membership. The Orion Combine that supervised them eventually collapsed, and the Velhari have been a core council member for 140 years. Drail's silver markings were still. His face was unreadable. The Murith Collective is now one of the 3 largest economies in this quadrant. The Drev have produced 4 council speakers, including the second longest serving speaker in this body's history. She paused. "I am not asking this council to give humans anything. I'm asking this council to read its own record and explain to me, on permanent file, how Resolution 7 Gamma is different from the structures that were placed on those species, which this council now agrees were wrong." Nobody spoke. If the answer is that it is not different, then this council should vote no. If the answer is that it is somehow different this time, I want to hear why, specifically on record, so that in 100 years the species sitting in these pods can read it and decide for themselves whether that reasoning held up. She stepped back from the floor table. Humans do not intervene because we are reckless. We intervene because we come from a world where waiting for authorization while something preventable happens is not caution. It is a choice. We learn that early and we learn it hard. What this council calls reactive, we call present. She looked at Orvin. I am done. Thank you for the floor. She walked back to her position. The chamber did not break into noise. It stayed quiet in the way a room stays quiet when everyone is holding the same thought at slightly different angles. Drayle finally spoke. His voice was level. The delegate's address will be noted in full. Orvin said nothing for a long moment. Then he called the recess. The recess lasted an hour. In that hour, Drayle made calls. His aide moved through the corridor between the delegate pods and the consultation rooms with the particular speed of someone managing a problem that was not supposed to have become one. 3 delegates who had been reliable votes were now asking questions. Not switching sides, just asking questions, which was almost worse because it slowed everything down and gave uncertainty a place to grow. Drayle still had the votes. He had counted them twice. What he did not have was time, because time was doing something inconvenient. Time was letting Nora's words settle into the chamber record, letting delegates go back to their pods and read the list she had read aloud, letting the names of the Velhari protection mandates sit in the official transcript next to the text of Resolution 7 Gamma, where any researcher in any future decade could pull them up side by side, that he needed the vote finalized before the session ended. He did not get it. Warden Grell submitted a formal record request 17 minutes into the recess. IT was filed through the Council Security Office using an authority code that had not been invoked in over a century. The code came from an old procedural framework, predating the current Council charter by about 40 years. It allowed the head of Galactic Security Forces to suspend any active motion affecting a named delegate if a formal investigation into the underlying incidents was open and active. Grell filed the investigation simultaneously to IT was 4 lines long. It named the 3 incidents. It requested formal review of Council response times and authorization procedures. It was not aggressive, and it was not political. It was simply a document that existed now, logged in the system, time-stamped, and procedurally airtight. The resolution could not move forward while the investigation was active. Not without the Council formally overruling their own security chief, which required a 2/3 vote and a written justification that would also sit in permanent record. Drayle found out while still in the consultation corridor. He stood very still for a moment. Then he asked his aide to confirm it. His aide confirmed it. Then he asked the aide to find out who had advised Grell on the procedural code. The aide came back 15 minutes later. Nobody had advised Grell. He had found it himself. He had been in the Council Legal Archive for most of the previous night. Drayle did not respond to that. He went back to his pod and sat down in the communications bay. Suki saw the filing come through before Nora did. She sat back in her chair and read it twice. Then she sent Nora a message. They're talking about us down there. In a good way. Nora read it in the observation wing. She read it a second time. Down there meant the underbelly. The informal networks that ran through the lower corridors and the common spaces between cargo containers and the small dwellings of people who had been in queues for decades. News moved differently in those corridors. It did not need official channels. It moved the way it always moved among people who had learned not to trust official channels. Person to person, quietly, fast that a human had stood in the council chamber and read the names of forgotten species aloud. A soldier with nothing personal at stake had reached into an old law and used it to slow a machine down. That was not nothing. Owen heard it from someone 3 corridors over. He sat with it for a while. Then he went to the wall where the count marks were, and he did not add a new one. He just looked at it. That evening, Grell walked past the human observation wing. He did not stop. He did not knock. He just walked past at a pace slightly slower than his usual one. Nora was at the window watching the gas giant when he passed. She did not see him. But later, when Suki sent her the formal filing documents to read, she saw his name on every line. Warden Grell, Warden Grell, Warden Grell. She sat with that for a long time. Outside, the gas giant's clouds moved in slow bands of orange and brown, enormous and indifferent, the way old things are indifferent to the small and urgent business happening in their orbit. But in the lower corridors of Verith Station, people who had been invisible for a long time were sitting with the strange and unfamiliar feeling that someone had looked their way. 3 days in a drifting pod was not comfortable. Dara and Algra took turns pressing their foot against the leaking hatch corner. They slept in shifts. The pod had emergency ration blocks, tasteless, dense but enough. The air recycler was functional. The temperature was cold, but survivable. Dara had been colder on night shifts on the rig. On the second day, a response signal came back through the beacon. Short, professional, in standard language. Signal received, vessel en route, estimated contact in 31 hours. She told Algra that he nodded slowly. Then he said, "You counted the sedatives and the food on day 3. Day 2, she said. I suspected on day 1. Confirmed on day 2. And you counted the guard footsteps. Yes. And the ventilation cycle. For seconds. From day 1. He was quiet for a moment. My people, he said, are not like this. Not many people are, she said. It was not a boast. Just a statement, delivered the same way she read a pressure gauge. Plainly, Commander Rail ship was a mid-class authority response vessel. Clean, efficient, crewed with people who kept their faces professionally still when the pod was brought inside and the hatch opened. Rail himself was gray-skinned, wide-shouldered, with steady eyes that moved over both of them in one sweep and showed nothing that he gave them water first. Then food, then a private room, each. He interviewed Dara on the morning of the 4th day. He sat across from her at a plain table with no recording devices that she could see, which meant the recording devices were small and well hidden. She did not mind that he asked her to walk him through it. She did, step by step. The restraints on day 1, the guard timing, the meal tray residue and the moisture and the vapor compound, the routing marks, the beacon bypass, the data from the construction terminal. He did not interrupt once. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at the table. Then he said, "We designed Vault Omicron assuming that prisoners would eventually accept their circumstances, that the environment would do the majority of the work." "I know," she said. "That was the flaw." He looked at her. Most beings, given enough isolation, stopped generating new ideas. The sedatives accelerated that. The food was engineered to reduce initiative without reducing basic function. The facility had a 96% success rate at permanent containment. For percent is a lot of people, she said. It is, he said, and something in his voice shifted slightly when he said it. She filed that away too. He looked at the data she had transmitted with the beacon. 12 names, 12 files, 12 cases with Doe's authorization signature and no corresponding legal process. He had been reading them since the pod was recovered. She had seen the look on his face when she was first brought aboard. He had been expecting a rescue and received a criminal case instead. "Why did you transmit the case files?" he asked. "They were part of the problem," she said. "A problem is not fully solved if the thing that caused it is still in place." He looked at her for a long time. Then he stood up, which she took to mean the interview was over. To the door, he stopped. "You could have just transmitted the distress signal," he said. "The case files were extra. Extra work is how you make sure the solution holds," she said. He left. The investigation moved fast, which she suspected was partly because the beacon had already spread the case numbers across 12 systems before anyone could respond to them. Administrator Doe was placed under formal review within 48 hours. The other 11 prisoners identified in the transmitted files had their cases opened for re-examination. Officer Tova submitted a formal witness statement 3 days after the pod was recovered, describing the conditions of the lower block and the nature of Doe's inspections. Her statement was detailed and steady. Alger was told his case was under review on the 5th day. A junior officer came to tell him in the room they had given him, small, plain, with a window that looked out at open space. He was sitting at the window when the officer delivered the news He did not move for a long time afterward. Dara came to check on him that evening. She sat near him, not talking, just present. After a while, he said, "Why did you come back for me?" "You were part of the problem I was solving," she said. He looked at her sideways. "That is a strange thing to say." "I know," she said, "but it's also true." He nodded slowly. Outside the window, stars moved past, slow and uncountable. Dara had given one short interview to an authority documentation officer. Name, occupation, account of events. She had no interest in saying more than that. She was not a story. She was an engineer who had been presented with a problem and had solved it the way she always solved problems, by paying close attention, moving carefully, and refusing to accept that anything was permanent. The transport home was arranged for the following week. She spent the remaining days quietly. She slept well for the first time in 35 days. She ate properly. She sat with Algra in the evenings, and they did not always talk out on the last night before departure. She took out the small notebook she had been keeping since day one in the cell, a thin piece of compressed packing material folded and refolded, written on in the dark with a wire tip she had shaped for the purpose. Measurements, timing notes, a rough sketch of the shaft routing marks, guard intervals, the molecular formula for the acid compound, written from memory. She looked at it for a while. Then she closed it and put it in her pocket. Outside, the stars were the same stars that had been there the whole time. They did not care what had happened. They did not know. The galaxy was large and mostly not paying attention, which was fine. Darkole had never needed anyone to be paying attention. She just needed a problem and enough time to look at it clearly. The galaxy had given her both.